Continuation of the insect morphology lecture. This video is about cephalic appendages. There are two types of cephalic appendages in the insect. The pre-oral appendages are the antennae, while the post-oral appendages are the mandibles, maxillae, and labium. The antennae. The insect head is characterized by possessing a single pair of antennae. They are the paired appendages of the second pre-oral or so-called antennal segment according to the classical theory of the head segmentation. The antennae of insects are the homologous with the antennules of the crustaceans. The antennae are the uniramous, segmented and mobile paired structures. They are basally fixed into the deep antennal sockets. Each antennal socket is provided with the external antennae sclerite with the antennal suture and with the internal broad membrane, the anthocorium. Each antennal socket occupies the position behind the respective ocellus in the orthopteroid insects, but may shift from the anterior region of the parietals to the facial region approaching the frontal suture or even the mandibular base. The antennae are not to be absent in Protura and also in larvae of most of Hymenoptera. These structures are typically innervated by the antennal nerves arising from the deuterocerebral lobes of the brain. In the structure, the antennae is irrespective of an insect species typically composed of a basal scape, middle pedicel and terminal flagella. The scape and pedicel are the single segmented divisions. The flagellum is the multi-segmented long part of the antenna. The number of segments of the flagellum are increasing in the successive instars, suggesting secondary or tertiary subdivisions segmented throughout the life. All segments of the flagellum are alike in most of the insects. In some cases, like the calcid flies, the flagellum is differentiated into three regions. The proximal region is composed of the ring segments, the middle region is composed of the peg-like segments forming the funicle, and the distal region is composed of swollen segments forming the terminal or distal club. So flagellum, flexor, pedicel, extensor, scape, anthocorium, membrane, levator, antennifer, depressor, ring. The antennae basic structures and musculature. The scape bears two apodemes, one dorsal and the one ventral. Both the apodemes are approaching closely the anthocorium membrane. They are spindle-shaped and provide site for attachment to the muscles innervating the scape of antennae. The pedicel bears a slender apodeme proximally. It is inserted by the flexor muscles of the flagellum. The flagellum is devoid of endoskeletal processes and muscles. Then articulation of the antennae. The scape is responsible for the articulation of the entire antenna in various directions. There are two types of articulations in which the one type of articulation can be seen in the grillotalpids. Lateroventral process is held in the groove on the rim of antennal socket along with fused cuticular process. The anthocorium may also take part in the process of articulation in which the rest of the base of the scape is embedded. In other insects, the scape is articulated by a pivot-like process of the antennal ridge known as the antennifer. The antennifer fits into the basal groove of the scape. The scape is inserted freely into the membrane, the anthocorium, so that antennae articulate in all directions. The musculature of the antennae in the insects from Thysanura to all Pterygota, each antennae is innervated by four muscles, two extrinsic and the remaining two intrinsic. The extrinsic muscles include the levator and the depressor muscles. Each of them is composed of two branches, one inner and the other outer. The extrinsic muscles arise from the anterior tentorial arms or are seen in some cases from both the anterior and the dorsal arms. The levator muscles are inserted into the dorsal apodeme of the scape. The depressor muscles are inserted into the ventral apodeme of scape. The intrinsic muscles are also of two types, the flexor and the extensor. It is apparent that these muscles move the flagellum and therefore called as the flexor and extensor of the flagellum. Both the flexor and extensor of the flagellum, both the flexor and extensor muscles arise from the base of the scape. The flexor muscle is inserted on the outer side, while the extensor on the other side, inner side of the base of the pedicel. No segment of the flagellum bears any type of muscle and is a peculiar feature of all pterygota and Thysanura. In rest of the pterygota, besides the scape and pedicel, all segments of the flagellum are provided with intrinsic muscles. Each segment bears 5 muscles which arise from the base of one segment and terminate in that of the other. The types of antennae. The antennae are highly modified in different groups of insects. They possess the taxonomic and sexual dimorphic significance in some insects, particularly the Coleoptera and Diptera. They can be classified into 13 types as follows. The cetaceous antennae. Cetaceous antennae. Types of antennae. The antennae is highly modified in different groups of insects. They possess the taxonomic and sexual dimorphic significance in some insects, particularly the Coleoptera and Diptera. They can be classified into 13 types as follows. The cetaceous antennae. The flagellum looks like a bristle due to gradual reduction in the size of the segments. For example, Odonata. Cetaceous. Then the filiform antennae, the flagellum appears as a thread-like structure made up of uniformly thin segments. For example, Blattidae. Filiform. Then the moniliform. The flagellum is composed of globose-shaped segments providing a beaded or necklace-like appearance to the entire antennae. Termites, then caloterms. Moniliform. Then the serrate antennae. The flagellum consists of triangular segments with eccentric arrangements, leaving the free ends of the segments freely on one side, which appears as the teeth of a saw. Serrate. The pectinate or flabellate antennae. Pectinate. The individual segments of the flagellum are extending on only one side of the long processes, and thus antennae become comb-like. Then the clavate antennae. The successive segments of the flagellum become gradually broader, giving an appearance of the club-shaped form to the antennae. Clavate antennae. Then the capitate antennae. The proximal segments of the flagellum are of uniform size, while the distal segments modify into a large knob or capitulum. The capitate antennae. Capitate antennae. The proximal segments of the flagellum are of uniform size, while the distal segments modify into a large knob or capitulum. Nitidulidae. Coleoptera. Capitate. Then the lamellate antennae. The terminal segments in the flagellum modified into the leaf-like broad plates forming a follate capitulum. Lamellate antennae. The geniculate antennae. The antennae are bent completely from the scape pedicel joint. And the plumose antennae. The flagellum is composed of large number of cylindrical segments, and the segments are provided with long hairs on either side. Male mosquitoes midges. Plumose antennae. The pilose antennae. The flagellum looks like a sharp, flexible hair. All segments are alike, fine and tubular, but without process. Female mosquitoes. The pilose antennae. Then the aristate antennae. The flagellum is subdivided, but the second segment is situated at a different angle on the first segment, and the anterior becomes pendant rather than usual porous. The arista develops on the third segment, first segment of the flagellum. The arista may be bare or hairy. The hairs may be developed on either side of the arista as seen in the housefly or above only. Whenever the hairs are developed above the arista, they may be simple as seen in the stable and hornfly or plumose are in the tsetse fly. The stylate antennae, three-segmented antennae and third segment divides repeatedly and thus it becomes falsely multi-segmented, often forming a stylate. Brachycera tabanus. So which are the major types? The types of antennae: cetaceous antennae, the filiform antennae, moniliform antennae, the serrate antennae, pectinate or flabellate antennae. The clavate antennae, the capitate antennae, the lamellate antennae, geniculate, plumose and pilose, then aristate antennae, along with stylate antennae. Once again, cetaceous antennae, filiform antennae, moniliform antennae, serrate antennae, the pectinate or flabellate antennae, clavate antennae and the capitate antennae, lamellate antennae, geniculate antennae, plumose antennae, pilose antennae, aristate antennae and the stylate antennae. Once again, cetaceous antennae, filiform antennae, moniliform antennae, serrate antennae, pectinate or flabellate antennae, clavate antennae, capitate antennae, lamellate antennae, geniculate antennae, the plumose antennae, pilose antennae, the aristate antennae, stylate antennae. Cetaceous, filiform, moniliform, pectinate, bipectinate, serrate, clavate, capitate, lamellate, geniculate, plumose, pilose and aristate. Once again, I'm going to read: cetaceous, filiform, moniliform, cetaceous, filiform, moniliform, pectinate, bipectinate, serrate, clavate, capitate, lamellate, geniculate, plumose, pilose and aristate. Once again, cetaceous, filiform, moniliform, pectinate, bipectinate, serrate, clavate, capitate, lamellate, geniculate, plumose, pilose and aristate. The gnathal appendage. The gnathal appendages in insects. The gnathal appendages consist of paired mandibles, maxillae and labium. Paired mandible, maxillae and labium. Labium is not paired. The labium is formed due to the fusion of a paired structure, tile second pair of maxillae. All these structures undergo variable modifications and are adapted for different modes of feeding. The mandibles. They are strongly chitinized structures and are commonly known as jaws. They always articulate in a transverse plane in the Lepismatidae and Pterygota. Lepismatidae and Pterygota, the mandibles are dicondylic. They articulate with the primary posterior and the secondary anterior condyles. One condyle, the ginglymus, articulate with the convex process of the clypeus, while the other condyle is set free to move into a socket at the lower end of gynae or post-gynae. In rest of the Pterygota and Epimeropteran nymphs, the mandibles are provided with only a single condyle and primary posterior condyle which articulate with the head capsule. The mandibles, pterygote, pterygote, some other. The mandibles are provided with a strong adductor and abductor muscles arising from the dorsal and lateral walls of the rhinium. There are also the ventral adductor muscles of the origin of anterior arms of the tentorium in the epimeridodonate larvae and also in the adult Isoptera and Orthoptera except the Acrididae. The mandibles carry out the function of biting and chewing the food materials in the orthopteroid insects. They are adapted into the sickle or stylus-like piercing organs in some fluid-sucking insects. They are modified into the defensive organs in termites and some beetles. The dentition of mandibles is evolved through among different groups of insects in accordance with the food material. In the phytophagous insects, the teeth are blunt like molars. In carnivorous insects, they are slightly pointed like incisors, while in omnivorous insects, they are of both types. The molars near the base and incisors on the rest of the blade, adapted for cutting as well as grinding the food material. Then the maxillae. These paired structures are homologous with the typical first pair of maxillae of the crustaceans and other arthropods. They are also known as the second pair of jaws of the insects. So, the mandibles carry out the function of biting and chewing. Then, in phytophagous insects, the teeth are blunt like molars. In carnivorous insects, they are slightly pointed like incisors, while in omnivorous insects, they are of both types. The molars near the base and incisors on the rest of the blade, adapted for cutting as well as grinding the food material. And the maxillae. These paired structures are homologous with the typical first pair of maxillae of the crustaceans and other arthropods. The maxillae, these paired structures are homologous with the typical first pair of maxillae of the crustaceans and other arthropods. These paired structures are homologous with the typical first pair of maxillae of the crustaceans and other arthropods. The mandibles we mentioned. Next is about the maxillae. These paired structures are homologous with the typical first pair of maxillae of the crustaceans and other arthropods. They are also known as the second pair of jaws of the insects. Each maxilla is composed of proximal cardo, middle stipes, lateral palpifer, inner parastipids or subgalea, and distal sclerite consisting of two lobes, inner lacinia and outer galea. The palpifer bears the maxillary pulp on the outside. The maxillary pulp is a sensory appendage and it is composed of 1 to 7 segments. The maxillae possesses various types of cuticular processes, hairs, and bristles. The maxillae bears a single condyle on the cardo. It articulates with the lateral tergal region of the rhinium. The maxilla is innervated from various muscles in different regions. The cardo is innervated by the anterior and posterior dorsal muscles. The rotators arising from the wall of the head and the ventral adductors form the tentorium. The lasnia is innervated by the radial flexure, which is in fact an extension of the anterior rotator dorsal muscle. The terminal parts of the maxillae are innervated by stipital muscles, the lacinia by the stipital flexure of lacinia and the galea by the stipital flexure of the galea. The palpus is innervated by the flexure levator and the depressor muscle of the stipe origin. The maxillae function as the second pair of jaws and are actively involved in the process of cutting and grinding the food materials. They also bear the gustatory receptors. They are highly modified in the food feeding insects. Okay. Then the labium. It is formed from the fusion of paired secondary maxillae. It closes the preoral cavity from the lower side and hence commonly known as the lower lip of insects. They resemble the second pair of maxillae of the crustaceans. In relation to feeding, it is modified into proboscis in Lepidoptera and foot canal in Diptera. Its terminal end may undergo complex modifications with the development of the pseudotrachea and chitinous hooks so that it can hold the skin of the host firmly, as evident in some blood-sucking flies. The labium is composed of distal prementum and the proximal postmentum. The prementum and the postmentum are separated by transverse suture, the labial suture. The postmentum is subdivided into a proximal segment, the submentum, and the distal one. The mentum in some orthopteroid insects. From the base of the prementum are differentiating a pair of lateral lobes, the palpifers. Each palpifer bears the labial palps. The labial palps is a secondary sensory organ and is composed of 1 to 4 segments. On the distal margin, the prementum bears 2 pairs of lobes. The outer pair of lobes are known as the paraglossy and lobes in the inner pair are termed as glossy. In some insects, the lobes of both the pairs fuse together and form a single structure, the lingua. Only the prementum and its appendages are innervated by the muscles. The ventral adductors arise from the tentorium and innervate the front and ventral side of the prementum. The flexor muscles are innervating the glossy and paraglossy, and the levator and depressor muscles, the palps, form the prementum itself. There are the extensor and flexor muscles in the palps. A pair of refractor muscles are also supplied to the prementum. Then the hypopharynx in some Epterygota. The hypopharynx is considered by some workers as a composite nasal appendage. The embryonic development of the hypopharynx of the Epterygote reveals that a pair of lateral lobes equivalent to postmandibular appendages or maxilla of Crustacea. The superlinguae fuse with median lobe, the lingua, and form a definite hypopharynx. Similar kind of development of the hypopharynx is also evident in some development of the primitive Pterygota, while in higher Pterygota it develops in a ventral median membranous lobe from the ventral wall of the labium. At the base, it bears an orifice of the salivary duct. In large number of insects, the arboreal region is sclerotized distally and proximally. It bears a pair of suspensory sclerites approaching upward and terminating into the lateral wall of the stomodium. Various muscles serves to swing the hypopharynx in forward and backward directions. Then hypopharyngeal sclerites. In orthopteroid and other biting chewing type of insects, the hypopharynx is well developed as a median muscle tongue-like lobular structure lying in the preoral cavity. It forms a small cup-like salivary cavity, the salivarium in close vicinity of the base of the prementum. The salivarium retains the opening of the duct of the salivary labial glands. The hypopharynx is provided with a pair of basal skeletal bars called basal plates or fulcral processes which are extended up to the salivarium. The proximal region of the adoral surface of the hypopharynx forms the floor of a preoral food chamber or the cybarium. The adoral surface is sclerotized distally and proximally contains a pair of suspensory sclerites forming a subspensoria and extended upward and after passing through a mouth inserted into the wall of stomodium. They articulate distally with the lateral distal plates of the hypopharynx. The dorsal salivary muscles of Fron's origin are inserted on the suspensorial sclerites, while 2 pairs of retractor salivary muscles of tentorial origin are inserted on the basal plates. A pair of dilator muscles is inserted on a dorsal wall of the salivarium. Besides this, presence of large number of intrinsic flexible muscles has been reported. These muscles swing the hypopharynx forwards and backwards within the preoral cavity. That is about hypopharyngeal sclerites. Then cervix or neck region. We mentioned we will be talking about this portion in this video, cervix or neck. The cervix in insects is a modified membrane-like flexible region between the head and thorax. According to IMS, it might have been developed as an intersegmental region between the last segment of head, second maxillary segment, and the first segment of the thorax. Henry and Stephead consider that the cervix is partly derived from the labial segment of the head and partly from the prothoracic segment, and their condensation is based on the innervation of the muscles inserted on the cervical sclerites. The dual origin of the cervix is also supported by the embryonic studies, and however believes that neck is entirely labial in origin, appearing as an extension of the post-occipital region of the head. It is facilitating movement of the head. Cervix of the neck. Cervix is partly derived from the labial segment of the head and partly from the prothoracic segment, and their extension is based on the innervation of the muscles inserted on the cervical sclerites. The dual origin of the cervix is also supported by the embryonic studies on this. However, believes that the neck is entirely labial in origin, appearing as an extension of the post-occiput region of the head. It is facilitating movement of the head. The membrane contains generally 3 pairs of cervical sclerites, the dorsal, lateral, and ventral. They are well developed in the primitive insects, Orthoptera, Dermaptera, Isoptera, and Odonata, but reduced in higher insects. The lateral sclerites are of great functional significance. They vary in number among different groups of insects, 1 in Epimeroptera or 2 or 3 in the higher insects. In the orthopteroid insects, the first lateral sclerate articulates with the occipital condyle, while the second lateral sclerate articulates with a ball and socket joint of head, facilitating movement of the head and various planes. Both the lateral sclerates are plate-like skeletal structures. First one is V-shaped, while second one is elongated rod-shaped sclerites and are closely hinged together and form a fulcrum between the head and prothorax. Whenever the first lateral sclerate makes a contact with the second one, performs articulation in the vertical plane. The second lateral sclerate is on the other hand connected with the prothoracic epistomal sclerate and moves in all planes, so that the first lateral sclerate articulate with the occipital condyle of the head, while the second lateral sclerate is hinged to the prothoracic episternum. The movement of the head is in fact carried out by the levator muscles arising from the occiput region of the head and the pronotum and inserted in the cervical lateral sclerites. Whenever these muscles undergo retraction, the head is pushed forwards. Similarly, the ventral muscle inserted on the second cervical sclerite whenever undergo retraction and cause lateral movements of the head. The longitudinal dorsal muscles form anterior-costal ridge of mesothorax, and ventral muscles from the sternal apophysis of the prothorax run into the occipital ridge or tentorium through the neck and all together retract the head onto the prothorax. Similar muscles in contraction cause lateral movements of the head also. The cervical muscles are innervated by the inhibitory nerve fibers.